Before you start reading, welcome to Crimson Secrets. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories that stay with you. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? We have listeners from all over the world, and we love knowing who's in the room with us. Now, let's talk about Evelyn. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look over her shoulder. She walked into that boardroom like she owned it. Because, for 11 years, she essentially had. The announcement was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp. The kind of announcement you dress for. The kind you rehearse. The kind that Cassandra Webb had been quietly preparing for 3 months, convinced that no one had noticed. She was wrong about that. Evelyn Marsh, 44 years old, co-founder of Marsh & Holloway Capital, daughter of the man who built the third largest private equity firm in the state of Connecticut, had noticed. Everything she had noticed in October, when the calendar invites started routing around her. She had noticed in November, when the quarterly projections document arrived, with a tab she wasn't supposed to see, then was quietly replaced an hour later, with a version that had one fewer tab. She had noticed in December, at the firm's holiday dinner, when her husband of 16 years touched the small of Cassandra's back, for less than 2 seconds, near the coat check and immediately looked away. 2 seconds. That was all it took. Some women would have confronted him that night. Some would have hired a private investigator or called a divorce attorney or cried in the car on the way home. Evelyn did none of those things. She finished her champagne. She smiled at the right people. She asked Cassandra if she was enjoying the salmon, and Cassandra had said yes. It was lovely, and Evelyn had said she was so glad. Then she went home, waited for Thomas to fall asleep, and opened her laptop. What followed was 6 weeks of the most focused work Evelyn had ever done in her professional life, and she had done a great deal of focused work. She did not make scenes. She did not give speeches. She simply began to understand the full architecture of what was being built around her, and then she made some quiet adjustments of her own. Thomas Holloway, 51, silver-templed, the kind of man who wore his confidence like a second suit, had made one very significant miscalculation. He had forgotten that Marsh & Holloway Capital was not his firm. It was not even their firm, not equally. The Marsh in the name belonged to Evelyn's father, Gordon Marsh, who had handed his daughter 40% of his original stake, the year she turned 30, on the condition that she never let anyone tell her the room was not big. Gordon Marsh was 73 years old and had been in a wheelchair since his stroke 2 years prior. But his name was still on the door. His signature was still on the founding documents. And more importantly, his relationships with the institutional investors, with the limited partners, with the 4-member advisory board that actually controlled the firm's direction, were all still very much intact. Evelyn had spent those 6 weeks making sure they stayed that way. The morning of the announcement, she arrived before anyone else. She set her bag down at the head of the conference table. Her usual seat, the one Thomas had recently begun occupying when she arrived late, which she had also noticed, and she poured herself a coffee from the sideboard. And she waited. Cassandra arrived at 8:47. She was wearing a new blazer, burgundy, the kind of color you choose when you want to be taken seriously, but also remembered. She paused in the doorway when she saw Evelyn already seated, and something moved behind her eyes, fast, barely visible. But Evelyn caught it. She always caught things like that. "Good morning," Evelyn said pleasantly. "Good morning," Cassandra said, and took a seat 3 chairs down. Thomas arrived at 8:52 with 2 members of the junior team and the firm's general counsel, a careful, gray-suited man named Philip who had worked for the firm since before Evelyn joined it. Philip made eye contact with Evelyn immediately. He did not look away. First, she knew then that he already knew what she had set in motion. He had probably known for 2 weeks. Philip was not the kind of man who was ever the last to know anything. The others filtered in. The room filled. Thomas stood at the front, one hand on the back of a chair, comfortable in the way of men who have long been comfortable in rooms, and he said that he had a few things to share this morning, a few exciting developments regarding the firm's future direction. He said that he and the advisory board had been in conversation about some structural changes. He said that these changes would position Marsh & Holloway for its next chapter. Evelyn watched him. She thought about the first time she had seen him, 20 years ago at a conference in Boston, where he had given a 30-minute presentation on emerging market strategies with a kind of easy conviction that made her want to argue with him. She had argued with him, over dinner, and then over breakfast the following morning, and then in letters. Actual, handwritten letters, which was Thomas's affectation, one she had found endearing. For the 4 months before they decided to build something together, a firm first, then a life. She had loved him for a very long time. She thought about that now, in the same way you think about a road you used to know well, when you find yourself looking at a map that doesn't show it anymore. Thomas said that, effective the 1st of March, Cassandra Webb would be assuming the role of Managing Director of Investments. The room responded in the carefully modulated way of people who had already been told and were now performing surprise at varying degrees of conviction. A few junior associates exchanged glances. The 2 senior analysts on the left side of the table looked at their notes. Philip looked at his hands. Cassandra smiled. It was the smile of someone who had rehearsed not smiling too broadly and had landed slightly on the wrong side of the calibration. It was too still, too arranged. The kind of smile that takes effort to hold. Evelyn recognized that effort. She had expended it herself in other rooms, on other mornings. Thomas said that Evelyn would remain in her current role as partner and chief strategy officer, with an expanded focus on external relations and investor communications. External relations and investor communications. It was, in the language of corporate restructuring, the equivalent of being handed a beautiful office with no window and told to enjoy the view. Someone near the back of the room began to clap. One of the junior people, probably terrified of silence, and a few others joined in. And then it was over. The announcement, the moment Thomas had been building toward, and the room began to exhale and reach for their coffee cups. And Evelyn stood up. "Congratulations, Cassandra," she said clearly. Her voice was steady. Her tone carried nothing that could be identified or used. Cassandra looked at her. "Thank you, Evelyn. I look forward to working with you in this new capacity," Evelyn said. She meant it as an answer to a question nobody had asked yet. The question was, what are you going to do about this? She picked up her coffee cup and her legal pad and walked out of the conference room at her usual pace, not quickly, not slowly, and returned to her office and closed the door and sat down at her desk. Then she picked up the phone and called her father. "Did it happen?" Gordon Marsh said instead of hello. His voice was slightly slower since the stroke, more deliberate, but the precision behind it was exactly as she remembered. "It happened," she said. And I need you to do the thing we talked about." A pause. Then, "Already done. Philip has the documents. I signed them this morning." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Thank you, Dad." "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me you'll let them figure it out on their own. I don't want you to explain it. I want them to find it." "That was always the plan," she said. "Good girl," he said, which she had stopped correcting him for years ago, because with Gordon Marsh the sentiment was always larger than the words, and she knew what he meant. What he meant was, "I see you. I have always seen you. I built something, and I gave half of it to you, and I knew you would know what to do with it when the time came." She hung up. She looked out her window at the February light coming off the water. The firm's office was on the 3rd floor of a building in downtown Hartford with a partial view of the Connecticut River, which was gray and flat this time of year, and somehow always calming to her in a way she had never been able to explain. She had 40 minutes before the thing her father had set in motion would become visible to the people it was designed to become visible to. She used those 40 minutes to return 3 emails, review a term sheet, and eat the yogurt she had brought from home and left in her desk drawer. Then Philip knocked. He didn't wait for her to say, "Come in." Philip never waited. He had worked for this firm since before manners like that were considered optional, and in his mind they still weren't, but he also understood that some moments superseded protocol. He closed the door behind him. "They're going to have questions," he said. "I know. The advisory board is asking for a call at 11. I'll be available." He looked at her with the expression of a man who had seen many things in many years of practicing corporate law and had learned to hold most of them inside a very small, very well-organized room in his mind. Your father's transfer of his remaining stake, the timing of it is going to raise some eyebrows. It was his stake to transfer whenever he chose, she said. He's been meaning to formalize it for 2 years. The stroke gave him a reason to put it off. The announcement this morning gave him a reason to stop putting it off. Philip nodded slowly. And the fact that it was transferred to your name rather than into the trust. My father wanted it in my name, she said. He's very clear on that. Another slow nod. It puts you at 53%. I know what it puts me at. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Thomas doesn't know yet. No, she agreed. He doesn't. Philip looked at her with something that was not quite admiration and not quite concern and was probably a precise mixture of both. You've been planning this since October, he said. It was not a question. I've been aware since October, she said. Planning takes longer. He left. She turned back to her window. The 11 o'clock call with the advisory board lasted 47 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. She answered every question with the calm efficiency of someone who has spent a great deal of time thinking about exactly this conversation. She explained that Gordon Marsh had transferred his remaining equity stake, 17%, to her directly, bringing her total ownership to 53% of the firm's voting shares. She explained that this was a private family decision, reflecting her father's wishes regarding estate planning and succession. She explained that as the majority stakeholder, she would be requesting a formal review of the managing director appointment in light of several governance considerations that she was prepared to outline in detail if the board wished to proceed to a formal session. The board wished to proceed. She had expected they would. Thomas found her in the hallway at 12:45. He had the look of a man who had received information he was trying to process faster than his face could manage. His jaw was doing something specific. She recognized it. She had sat across from that jaw at breakfast for 16 years. Evelyn, Thomas, I just got off a call with the board. I heard you were on that call, she said. She looked at him steadily. My father made a legal decision regarding assets that belonged to him. I didn't go to anyone. People made decisions that were theirs to make. You knew I was going to announce. I knew a great many things, she said. I often do. He stopped. He had the look now of a man who was running the timeline in his head, October, November, December, January, February, and beginning to understand that what he had taken for passive acceptance was something else entirely, something patient. How long patient? He asked. She considered the question. It was, she thought, the first genuinely honest question he had asked her in months, maybe longer. Long enough, she said. She walked past him to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. She did not look back. Behind her, she heard him say her name once more, quietly in the voice he used when he was not performing confidence, but actually reaching for something. The voice she had loved first, the one that appeared without warning. In the early mornings before the days started, the one she had spent 16 years learning every variation of. She heard it. She let the elevator doors open. She stepped in. The doors closed. She stood in the elevator alone. For the 11 seconds it took to reach the lobby, and she looked at her own reflection in the brushed steel of the door, and she thought about the woman she had been when she walked into that conference room at 9 o'clock this morning, and the woman she was now at 12:52 in the afternoon on a gray February day with a river outside the window, and her father's handwriting on a document that changed everything. She thought those two women were very similar to each other. That was the thing I had never quite understood. He had spent months constructing a version of events in which Evelyn was diminished, moved aside, recategorized, given a title with the word external in it, so that she would face outward and stop looking inward. He had done all of this with some care, some strategy. He was not an unintelligent man, but he had built his strategy on a foundation that did not account for one essential thing. Evelyn had never needed his permission to have power. She had come into this firm with it. She had simply been quiet about it. The way you are quiet about things that are so fundamentally yours that announcing them seems redundant. The lobby was empty when she reached it, except for the security desk and a young woman from the compliance team who was pulling on her coat and didn't look up. Evelyn pushed through the revolving door into the cold Connecticut air. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The river was visible from here if you looked east, a gray strip between the buildings. She looked at it. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, who was 3 years younger and had worked in arts administration her whole career and had precisely zero interest in equity structures or governance reviews, but an extremely high interest in the well-being of her older sister. Dad called me. Are you okay? She typed back, yes. Are you in town? The response came immediately. I can be. Dinner? She typed, yes. She put her phone in her coat pocket. She thought about dinner with her sister, about the restaurant on Farmington Avenue, where they always ordered the same things, about the way her sister would listen to all of it, without trying to offer solutions, which was the precise thing Evelyn needed most right now. She thought about Thomas. She thought about the 11 years she had spent building something with him, brick by brick, in the way you build things with someone when you believe the foundation is solid. She thought about October and the calendar invites and the tab in the spreadsheet that disappeared. She thought about 2 seconds at a coat check in December. She was not without grief. People sometimes assume, when a woman acts with precision in moments of betrayal, that the precision means the grief is absent. It doesn't mean that. The grief was present. It was organized, held at a careful distance, but it was there. She would feel it later, when there was room for it. She had learned to do that. To give difficult emotions a time and place, to acknowledge their existence without letting them sit at the controls. It was a skill she had developed young, the daughter of a man who built things and expected her to understand how they were built. She had understood. She had always understood. But understanding the architecture of something doesn't mean you're not allowed to mourn when it comes down. The afternoon passed in the orderly way of afternoons following events that have restructured. There were calls. There were emails. There was a conversation with the firm's communications director about messaging for the staff, which Evelyn handled with the same deliberateness she applied to everything. She did not characterize Thomas. She did not perform magnanimity. She simply described what was true. The ownership structure of the firm had been clarified, and the board would be meeting to review certain appointment decisions in light of governance protocols, and she was available to speak with anyone who had questions. She was available. She was always available. That was something Thomas had also underestimated. He had begun to treat her availability as a kind of ambient background feature. Something that was simply there, like the furniture, like the carpet, like the partial view of the river. He had stopped seeing it as a choice she made every day. At 5:30 she sent the last email of the day and closed her laptop. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She walked through the now quiet office. Most of the staff had left. The junior team's desks were dark, and she passed the conference room where the morning's announcement had taken place, and did not look in through the glass. She took the elevator down. She walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The board's formal review was scheduled for the following Thursday. It would result, in his Philip way of making things clear, in the reversal of Cassandra's appointment, not because Evelyn had asked for it, but because the government documents were specific about the process by which a majority stakeholder's concerns could trigger a review. And once a review was triggered, the outcome of this particular review was, as Philip had put it, not especially ambiguous. Not especially ambiguous, which was Philip's way of saying, it's already decided. The Thomas would remain a part too, in the way that things become your name when you have built them with someone, and that was not something Evelyn intended to change. She was not interested in erasure. She was interested in accuracy. She started the engine. She drove to the restaurant on Farmington Avenue, and her sister was already there at their usual table by the window, and she had already ordered the bread, and when Evelyn sat down, her sister looked at her for a long moment, without saying anything. Then she said, "You look tired." "I am tired," Evelyn said. But I'm okay." Her sister passed her the bread. She told her all of it, from October, and the tab in the spreadsheet, to the coat check in December, to the 6 weeks of quiet preparation, to the morning's announcement, and the 11 o'clock call, and the 47 minutes, and Peace face, and Thomas's jaw, and the text from their father that simply said done. And her sister listened to every word of it, the way she had listened since they were children, with her whole face, without interruption, without offering to fix anything. When Evelyn finished, her sister was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He really thought you wouldn't notice. He thought I'd notice and not do anything," Evelyn said. Her sister considered this. "Which is worse?" "Much worse," Evelyn agreed. They ordered dinner. They ate it. They talked about other things. Their father's physical therapy, a film her sister had seen twice, the particular difficulty of February in New England, which they had both agreed on, February for 40 years, and saw no reason to stop agreeing on now. At 9:15, Evelyn drove home. She stood in the kitchen of the house she had lived in for 12 years. The house that was hers, that had always been hers, that her father had helped her buy 2 years before she married Thomas. A fact that her attorney had pointed out, gently, some weeks ago, was legally relevant, and she made herself a cup of tea. She stood at the kitchen window with her tea and looked out at the backyard. The February dark was complete. There was nothing to see, but she looked anyway, the way you look at things that are familiar, that you have looked at so many times that the looking itself has become a kind of home. She thought about a quote she had read once years ago and never forgotten. That power is not taken, it is remembered. The people who seem to lose it and regain it were never, in the essential sense, without it. They simply stopped reminding others of what was theirs. She had stopped reminding people. That was true. She had been for some years so busy building and tending and maintaining that she had let the reminding lapse. She had assumed the architecture would speak for itself. Buildings need signs sometimes, even very solid ones. She finished her tea. She washed the cup and set it on the drying rack. She turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow, there would be more calls, more emails, the board review, the conversations that followed restructurings, the delicate work of reordering things that had been disordered. There would be at some point a conversation with Thomas that was more honest than any they had managed in the past several months, and it would be painful in the way that honest conversations about the end of things are always painful. Regardless of how long you have seen them coming, she would handle all of it, one thing at a time, in the right order, with the care she gave to everything. That was what she did. She walked upstairs in the dark in her own house, and she did not feel triumphant. She did not feel defeated. She felt something more precise than either of those things, something that had no easy name, but that sat in the chest like ballast, like the particular weight of knowing exactly who you are, and exactly what you have built, and exactly what you are capable of. When it comes to that, it had come to that. She had been ready. That, in the end, was the only thing that mattered. Not the documents, not the percentages, not the board review or the governance language or the careful 6 weeks of preparation. All of those were just tools. The thing underneath them, the thing that made all of them possible, was simpler and older than any of it. She had never let anyone convince her the room wasn't big enough for her. She wasn't about to start now.